Good morning. Wednesday, the 29th of Sivan and June 9th. We're studying the entire Talmud, one page at a time. Presently studying Maseches Shabbos, chapter 5. We're getting towards the end of chapter 5. We're on 55a. Maybe we'll get on to 55b. That's Nun Hey Amud Aleph. And really briefly, yesterday, I think we had a pretty fascinating first half of a discussion about when and how and that tochecha, admonishment, telling a friend when they're or neighbor or fellow Jew that they are doing something wrong is something that we know is a responsibility in Jewish tradition. There is a biblical verse, that one should admonish their friend if they're doing something wrong. And yesterday's discussion talked really about the culpability, potential liability, and even being punished in the event that someone in your influence circle is doing something wrong and you don't speak up. And so we started off talking about that not everyone has the same degree of influence. Some people can influence their family. Some can influence a local community, and other people, it's rare, have access to a worldwide population. The example Rashi gave yesterday was a king or a prince or someone that has that kind of influence. Today, we referenced briefly, I think our world is very interconnected, and you could be a simple person that somehow has a following on the internet or social media. And so although it's not quite the same, we have the opportunity to take advantage of our influence and to be a positive force for good and to help people stay in line with their true, deeply held values. And the Gemara here is talking about instances of liability when that did not happen. And we concluded, after a bunch of different discussions, we concluded with a study of a story in the book of Yechezkel, where the prophet is told that the prophet describes how, and with the Gemara's analysis and interpretation, how these angels, Malachei Chabad, these angels were to place or draw a tuf, the letter tuf, spelled in the Gemara, tuf, yud, vav, and the tzaddikim had a tav in ink, the Rishayim a tav in blood, and the destructive angels knew to target those that had the blood and to protect those that had the black ink. Unfortunately, the prophet, and particularly the way the Gemara interprets the story, explains the story, ultimately Hashem retracted the protection that was made available by virtue of the tzaddikim and their ink tuf. The Gemara describes that there was a dialogue, kaviyachol, so to speak, between the midas hadin, Hashem's, the justice. What was the word we used yesterday? Anyone remember what was the exact description we used for midas hadin? What was the English word?
Well, justice, or
I'm trying to remember the exact word we used. The attribute of justice, whatever exactly that means, has a conversation with Hashem and says, listen, why are these people being protected? They're pretty good, but they're missing in one very, very important area, which makes them not perfect. And that area was their lack of protest to the evildoers. Hashem says, hold on. I know that ultimately those evildoers would not have taken your words very seriously, the tzaddikim's words very seriously. And the midas hadin, the attribute of mercy, ultimately says, of judgment rather, ultimately says that they didn't know that the person wouldn't answer. And so it opened up the idea that there are three scenarios. There's the situation where you know you have influence. I think that's fairly rare even for us, especially in this modern world. We have circumstances where we're absolutely certain that we'll be ineffective, and there's different reasons why that might be the case. And typically, if you know that you can't be effective, even in halachic discussion, you are not obligated to speak up when your words will have no influence and it might even cause you harm. However, there are scenarios, and Tosfos points this out, where you're not certain. It's hard we don't know what's in the other person's mind, and we don't know what's fueling a toxic, negative behavior. And so the Tosfos highlights that the Gemara is saying essentially under such a circumstance, we should go out of our way and also let our friend know that there's a better way and a healthier way, and what they're doing is not good according to the Jewish values or tradition. Of course, all of this was introduced because we're talking about the para, the cow of Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah that was, or his neighbor's cow that was allowed to go out adorned in a way that's not appropriate on Shabbos. And just to add and to tie it in, it is possible that Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah was of the impression, these are some of the commentaries say, Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah was under the impression that she wouldn't have listened. I think Dr. Hammer or someone brought this up yesterday, so I just want to confirm that some of the commentaries say that maybe he thought she wouldn't respond, and therefore there was no point in reaching out. And the Chachamim said, you don't really know. You should have spoken up. Maybe she would have listened. An alternative way of understanding this is, and this is the last point of my intro, and I want to hear from Reb Beryl, and then we're going to jump right into our tough story, our tough segment of the Talmud. If you were on yesterday, you know what I'm referring to, which is there's another understanding of the machlokes of the debate between Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and the rabbis in this discussion of tochacha, of admonishing your friend. And that is, maybe sometimes there's something called a chilul Hashem. Sometimes when a person does something publicly, your silence can be interpreted as acceptance or some kind of endorsement. And maybe Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, listen, she's not going to listen to me. Everybody knows it. And therefore, no one will infer that I'm supporting this. The Chachamim may have said, listen, ultimately, it's happening in your neighborhood. You got to speak up, even if that'll be ineffective. And those are some ways of understanding this discussion. The next part of the Gemara is going to try to figure out what's the significance of the letter Tav. Why was the sign on the foreheads of the individuals, the tzaddikim, the righteous people, and the Rishayim, why was it a Tav? But first, Reb Beryl Schuster, please, you were going to say something. I'd love to hear your comment.
Yeah, I'm just realizing that on top of all the heavy responsibilities upon a Hasidic rabbi, we have this whole area, which must be a tremendous load upon a Hasidic rabbi who has the influence and feels that people will listen to him. Just as an aside, wow.
Yeah, Beryl, respectfully, why only a Hasidic rabbi?
Because his influence is greater, and his understanding that, especially if we take the Lubavitcher Rebbe, where he felt that everybody could be redeemed, he's basically responsible for the whole Jewish world.
Well, it can be said that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and again, I'm glad you brought it up because his yard site is this Sunday. It likely can be said that that the Lubavitcher Rebbe showed us how one can believe in the influence of their words and give tochacha, and yet do it with a kind of class where most people aren't left feeling miserable and pathetic, rather inspired and empowered. And so I think it's a fair comment that the Rebbe perhaps teaches us that you could tell someone that there's a better way and there's more to do, but do it in a way that will be effective and not in a way that will deter them. And now I need to add one more comment. In the Hayom Yom, right, the collection of daily teachings that was published by the Rebbe before he was a Rebbe, he writes about there's a mitzvah called Ochiach et Amitecha. You have to admonish your friends. But he says, first you got to cut your nails. What does that mean? Before you're going to go dig into your friend and tell them that you're doing something wrong, make sure that you're not going to do it in a way that's going to be hurtful to them and ineffective. And also make sure that you're channeling within an awareness that what you're doing is not for yourself. You're doing it for him. It's not because you're going to get some kind of commission or I have a mitzvah of Ochiach Tochiach. Of course you do. But make sure that it's coming with a sincere concern for your friend. And by the way, when it comes from a sincere place, our friends, family will pick it up. And when it's coming from an insincere and greater than thou, holier than thou perspective, they'll also pick that up and will be less effective as well. So that's a little bit of a Hasidic thought, very much connected to our Gemara. Reb Allen?
I wanted to, there's two scenarios that I think of. One is what you just mentioned, is where do you draw the line? I mean, do you correct somebody in front of a crowd and embarrass him? And the second scenario is when somebody's, let's say, take an example for saying Kiddush at Shabbos table.
Yes.
And he makes a mistake. He's reciting Eishes Tyler and he makes a mistake. Do you correct him?
Good question. So question number one, typically, because the purpose of telling someone off is so that they should actually take your word seriously, it's almost always important that it is done in a private setting. And I must confess, early on in my career, I once advised someone that they could do something a little different, and it wasn't sufficiently in a private setting, and that person felt bad and I felt terrible. And I learned that you have to really be careful that that it's done in the right setting and without people around. With the exception, and that's why I love your question, with the exception, of course, if the act is being done in public and it's a chil Hashem, well, then you would have to speak up. Then your speaking up is not so much to change the person's mind, but to make sure that it's clear to all that that's not really an acceptable practice. And then it's more of a condemnation of sorts than an act of tochacha, hoping to get the person to change their mind. But that's rare. Along the same lines, my personal perspective, and others disagree with me, is that if a person is saying Kiddush or Eshet Chayil, and maybe it's not their first language, they're probably already under a lot of pressure, and it's typically ill-advised to correct them, in my opinion.
Right.
Unless they want to be corrected, which that's, of course, a different story. A Balkore, however, is signing up to be told that they're getting it wrong. And even when they get it right, they're told they're getting it wrong. And certainly when they make a mistake, that if you can't take the heat, don't stand by the bima. Dr. Hammer.
And I think you demonstrate this best when people get called up for an aliyah in terms of the individual reaction to people not doing it exactly right, knowing whether or not it's appropriate to correct them in a house. So I think that's done very well. I just wanted to give Hakar Satov for our learning and for the example that you gave about the suicide the other day, but also for speaking up at the right time. Yesterday afternoon, my wife and I turned from Hallandale Beach Boulevard onto I-95 going north. And there was, all of a sudden, there was an accident there. And 4-car accident, some spun the other way. We didn't see it happen, but we were obviously right behind where it happened. And everybody was just going around it. And we followed them getting past around it. And I started to think right away, what's going on? There's nobody there. Nobody stopped. No one. And we called 911. Okay. I told her, call 911. Oh, she said they're probably on there. And when we called, nobody had called 911. It's
Wow.
a 4-car accident on the entrance going north, 2 of them, and it was a serious accident. Okay. We didn't see any people. So maybe people assumed, but we knew it just happened. You heard the crash, and they had us hold on. They wanted names. Who are you? Blah, blah, blah. And then while we were talking, 911 gives you over to the highway patrol people, whatever they call them. And then the guy said, oh, now we're getting somebody else calling. But it must have been a good minute and a half after this happened. And I was really telling I said, this came from the shear in terms of the importance of speaking up at these times. So Yasher Koach to learning this and to the shear. So you should know that whatever we're not remembering in terms of the actual Gemara, we're learning in terms of the importance of the intent of learning Gemara and the halachas related to it. So Yasher Koach.
Yasher Koach, doctor, which I need to add one last comment, then we'll jump into the Gemara, which is that I'm speaking to the police recently because of some of the stories here. People have this assumption, and I know where it comes from. When kids are young, we teach them don't call 911 unless it's emergency, because we don't want kids just randomly calling. But we continue with that sense of we shouldn't call 911 until adulthood. And really, the police, if there's a doubt that there might be a need for 911, better call than not to call. And a lot of us are, for some reason, myself included, it takes like a proactive override of that sense of, oh, I shouldn't call. If there's a doubt, call, and they'll deal with our calling. So Yasher Koach for that story, and thank you. We should really we should take that as a testimonial. We'll put it on. All right. So the Gemara now has a question. This is our tough Gemara. Uma Ishna tough. Why in the story is the letter tough being drawn on the foreheads of individuals? What is the significance of the letter tough? So the Gemara says, you want to know? I'll tell you. The letter tough is the beginning of an important word. Tichye, you shall live. And tough, Tamus shall die. So basically, the letter Tuf can have multiple meanings. And so the Tuf was a sign for those that were meant to live, and for those to die, to die. Those that know little Hebrew grammar will ask a question, which is a fair one, which was whenever we're saying you shall or it shall happen, we use the Tuf, right? Tishtek could also, but that's a question for grammar, but that's the point. The Tuf could be meaningful.
Elech, Shechal, you know, it's all.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihaya b'dvaro.
Amen.
So Shmuel therefore gives a different answer, which will be less irksome to those that are into Hebrew grammar. Taf stands for Tama Zechut Avot. For this situation, merit of the Avot, of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov has run out. Rabbi Yochanan added, the Taf can also mean Tachon Zechut Avot, that it should be activated or should apply. Let's hear Rabbi Steindal's, or okay, he says mercy will come in the result of this Zechut Avot. I think it means more that it should. You should be imbued with this Zechus, which brings an interesting question. I didn't consider this when I initially learned it, but I was looking around. Tama Zechut Avot. What is it? And the Gemara actually discusses this. What does it mean? Well, the Gemara will discuss it too. Let's take a peek in the Yoyada. Okay, he asked an interesting question. This is what the Taf of Tamos Tichya is a prefix, right? In the Hebrew language, it's applied to affect a grammatical change to the word. Again, grammar is not my thing, I gotta admit, but this much I know.
It makes it the future.
So it makes it the future, shall happen. So the Ben Yehoyada says a similar question. You could have choose many words because there are certain prefixes that are very, very common. So for example, Aleph means I will, right? Or Nun means you will, or we will. So he says, why don't you use an Aleph or a Nun? As well, Aleph and Nun can have different effects for different words. The Tuf always means that it shall happen to you or to others. Okay, that's a grammatic question. But here's really the important point. Does Zechut Avot run out? What does it mean? Right, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, our forefathers, and we're constantly referencing them in prayer to their Zechus. So what does it mean? What does it mean that it runs out? How does it run out? So the Ben Yehoyada asked this question, and it's a good enough question that I want to just go through it briefly. So he says, "In a kavona tam legami." We're not talking about that it runs out entirely, because to this day we say Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, and we talk about Zechut Avot. What it means is that once upon a time, a Jew, without appealing or praying for Zechut Avos, it would be like an automatic shield, if you will, an automatic protection. Nowadays, we need to be certain to reference and ask for it in prayer, and that's what happens in our davening. We say, we're appealing to the Zechut Avot.
Rabbi,
Yes.
after duchening, people come to us and they say thank you or something, and we say Baruch Tiyeh.
Yeah, be
It's
blessed.
the same word.
Yes.
Okay.
You're saying
good.
Tiyeh means
I never knew what it really meant.
Yeah, Bruchim to you, or in Yiddish, Zai gebencht, be blessed. Bruchim to you, you should be blessed. Because what happens is we gave a blessing, they're saying thank you, and we say, no, it should actually. See, Alan, most of the folks here, besides for myself, I believe, don't relate to our experience. They don't understand how difficult it is to be a Kohen. I'm kidding. Well, there are areas where it is hard to be a Kohen, but I don't think the Birchas Kohanim is the part.
Kal v'chomer to be a Levi.
A Levi's like the middle child. It's not easy being a Levi.
Anyways, Baruch Tiyeh for our group.
Yeah, Bruchim to you. You shall all be blessed. But we love Levim here on this chat. So
Sure do.
all right, and the Kohanim, we owe a lot. We owe a lot to our Levim. but the Levim should be grateful that we don't ask them to wash our feet. So, there's a
Right,
two-way street.
right.
All right, Reish Lakish adds something else to the meaning of the tuf, and I think this is a more macro idea that we can take to the bank. Reish Lakish says, you know what the tuf is? Sof chotamo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It is the final letter in the signature of Hashem. And this may be familiar. When I said yesterday we're going to see a familiar Gemara, this is it. Amar Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina taught, Chotamo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu emet. Hashem's signature. When Hashem signs his name, he writes Kaviyachol. Hashem doesn't need a pen to sign his name, but Hashem's signature is MS. So what's the final letter of the signature? Tough. Rashi. What does that mean? Emtsoyis la'oisiyos v'rishon v'acharon. It's the middle letter, the first letter, and the last letter. So why does Hashem use the word emes to represent his name? Well, we know that Hashem always existed, meaning Hashem exists beyond the constraints of time and space. Therefore, Hashem is first, there's no beginning. Achron, there is no end. And in the middle, the totality of existence, Hashem is the boss. Aleph, the first letter, Mem, the middle letter, Taf, the last letter. So what word represents Hashem? It's the word emes. Let's read this last line. I'm going to take another look at the Ben Yehoyada and we can discuss this. I think in some of the texts that describe, and you'll correct me, those that read some more contemporary texts that talk about the creation of a golem, right? A man-made, so to speak, using tools that are provided to certain people by Hashem. So they say that they put in the forehead the word emes, aleph, mem, taf, which is like channeling Hashem's presence and truth. And then according to those same legends, and I don't know how far back they go or not, is in those legends, the way the golem was deactivated is that the aleph was scrubbed out. You're familiar with this? Whoever has read some of the more contemporary literature. I'm sorry?
Maharal Prague with the golem in Prague.
Yeah. Again, I don't think it goes back to the days of the Maharal, but there were some contemporary authors that wrote a lot of.
If you take emes and scratch out the aleph, you get mace.
Right. So I'm saying, I don't know if this goes back to deep Kabbalistic truths. I may be very wrong, but it's probably inspired by this Gemara. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says, Elu b'nei adam shekimu satayra kula me aleph v'ad taf. Alternatively, the taf represents the tzaddikim who kept the whole Torah from aleph until taf. So suffice it to say, today we're having a taf shir. We spoke about a whole bunch of different reasons why letter taf might be significant. And here now we're talking about the word emes and taf particularly being the final letter of the Hebrew aleph base. Now let's take another look over here. What does it mean that emes is Hashem's signature? Let's see if he gives something we can share here. No, he just he points out a few things, some gematria that's beyond me. But then he points out that, of course, what is truth? So in the Talmud, truth is something that's not changing. When your story changes, it's not true. When the story is consistent, it's true. What happened and what you say is true. Rivers that dry up are called naharot hamechazin, false rivers, because they're not true. So consistency, dependability is true and consistent. Hashem is the ultimate constant, the ultimate dependable in Jewish existence, and therefore the word emes is Hashem's signature. Indulge me just for another moment. I'm glancing through the Medrash, which is linked over here. I'm not seeing. All right, not for now. Let us continue. Any other comments? Anyone have any other ideas about the aleph, about emes? Excuse me.
Rabbi?
Yes, please.
It's interesting that in English, the concept is also used. You say someone knows about literature from A to Z, all inclusive. So it's used in a way in the same sense.
Yep, it's true.
Also, I think it was Lincoln who said no man has sufficient memory to be a good liar.
Oh, I like
A
that.
lawyer, you said?
The opposite for the lawyers.
So now the Gemara is going to ask, the Gemara, by the way, if you think this is the end of the interesting discussion, it's going to get a lot more juicy. So hold on tight. Put on your seatbelts. The Gemara now asks,
In Greek, they say from alpha to omega.
In Greek, you say, I'm sorry, alpha?
In Greek, they say from alpha to omega.
Which means from the
Again,
beginning.
from the first letter of the alphabet to the last one. It is the same idea.
Professor, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have any thoughts about Emet being Hashem's signature?
I have tough time understanding the concept of signature. I understand that this is not literal, but from frequent repetition, especially during Yom Kippur service, somehow it's very hard to avoid the literal interpretation, and that bothers me very much. Which means I don't have any real thoughts how to understand it symbolically and not literally. And I hope that will become clear from your comment.
Oh, you put me on the spot. I'm going to have to defer because I want to give a comprehensive answer because this really deserves a proper presentation on what it means, because you're correct. It would be very, very not consistent.
You got me on the spot. I got you on the spot too.
Okay, so now we're even. I appreciate that. It would be certainly incorrect or inconsistent with Jewish belief to say that Hashem literally has a physical signature present somewhere. It's more expressive of.
We also talk about the book of life and all those accounting that is hard to understand literally.
So Judaism.
Or there is a temptation to understand literally.
Yeah, so Judaism frequently provides for us, because our human understanding is limited, and more specifically, our concept of spirituality is restricted, no fault of our own, by our very, very physical existence and experience. And so the Torah and Judaism is very comfortable speaking anthropomorphically. It's very comfortable speaking with an analogy that we can visualize. And I would say, I would go as far as this. I think the Torah is not entirely uncomfortable if we were to imagine a literal book. Because our imagination of a book is not a problem on God's end, it's a problem on our end, where we have a hard time imagining that all this data could be preserved, collected, and filtered in a certain, with absolute clarity and ability, the way Hashem does. So of course Hashem doesn't have a physical book, but of course all that information is accessible, available with a precise accuracy as if there was a text that we could look at. So we understand generally the Torah speaks anthropomorphically, and it's starting with references to Hashem's hand, the hand of Hashem, the arm of Hashem, the finger of Hashem. These are all not literal. These are all descriptions of Hashem's great influence, the way humans use their hands or arm or finger to manipulate and influence the world. Hashem can influence it with his great, by being the creator. So I believe, and again, this is not the final comment, and I know that I know, for example, and I want to look up, I'm certain the Maharal, for example, I'm certain has extensive writings on the philosophy of this idea, and more recent writers and Hasidic works.
I just want to tell the professor that he's in very good company, because the Rambam battles with this problem in many, many places.
I wouldn't say the Rambam battles with it.
Rambam discusses examples of anthropomorphisms similar to what the rabbi just said, like Hashem's hand, or Hashem sees, or Hashem comes down, and he does a very good job in doing that. But that's not really the issue that I am trying to address, because we are talking about physical representation of Hashem that is very bothersome.
Right. So the issue here at hand, which again is that the word emes being Hashem's signature, what is the concept of a signature that's not a physical signature? Because more specifically, in case you were wondering that maybe Hashem does have a signature, where would that signature be present? So obviously we're not talking about a literal and physical signature of God. I believe it is representative of the ideas that we've mentioned. The consistency of Hashem, the dependability of Hashem. The fact that Hashem uses, the creation of Hashem is used by the spiritual concept of the words and the letters. And but I have a feeling that when we'll dig deep and we'll look, there'll be some more. And I also recall seeing there are some, I think mathematicians would like to talk about certain truths that are evident consistently throughout their discipline. And I think scientists might talk about the most basic element, and they may find certain consistencies that are reflective of the consistency of the creator. But it's certainly not my space and not my expertise. And so I want to stop over here, leaving us a little bit wanting for more, because with Hashem's help, there is more, but I don't want to present it to you in a not well-researched way. So suffice it to say, the letter Taf on the foreheads of these people, according to Reish Lakish, is representative of the fact that represents Hashem's presence, Hashem's truth, Hashem's justice, and we'll leave it at that. So Yashikach to everyone for this little. Believe me, we're gonna have a lot more to discuss in just a few lines. So hold on tight. Those of you that peeked ahead know what I'm talking about. All right, so you mentioned that the merit of the Avot run out. When did that happen? We didn't get the memo. Or when did that memo go out? So the Gemara is now going to bring a few different opinions about when the caliber of the Jewish people's behavior took a turn to the point where there may have been complications in Zechus Avos. We've done a lot of talking, so I want to read the text first, and then we'll make a disclaimer relating to some Christian doctrine. But let's read some lines first. Me'imot Hoshea ben Beri. The first opinion is that it was in the era of the prophet Hoshea, who did a lot of admonishing the Jewish people, and it's expressed in this verse from his prophecy. Agale et nevulat navluta leinei ma'aveh v'ish lo yatzilena miyado. I'll uncover her lewdness in the sight of her lovers, and none shall deliver her out of my hands. The Jewish people will be vulnerable, and they will not be responded. They won't be delivered by who should deliver them. The Gemara and Rabbi Steinsaltz explain, or Rashi explains, that they will not immediately be saved by virtue of having the Zechut Avot, although once upon a time that may have existed. It was all what's the word? They ran out. They drained the battery by frequently depending on Zechut Avot. That's the way Rashi, the visual, the imagery that Rashi presents. Where do you see that in the verse? Very interesting. I didn't consider this, but the Ben Yoyada says, look at the Hebrew words. Agalet navluta, they'll be exposed. V'ish lo yatzilena, and no man will save them. What is ish? So the Ben Yoyada says, you know what? Ish, Aleph Yud Shin. Aleph stands for Abraham. Yud stands for Yitzchak. And Shin stands for Yaakov. How does Shin stand for Yaakov? Because Yaakov has three names in the Torah. We typically talk about two, but really he has three. Yisrael, Yaakov, Yeshurun. Three different names, each starting with a Yud. And if you've ever looked at the Shin, the way it's written, particularly in the Kitab Ashurit, the way it's written in the Torah, it's essentially three Shins. So that Shin is the Shin of Yaakov is a little bit of a stretch, but he says that we can actually visualize in the word Ish lo yatzilena, that this means that the Avot will not have an easy time appealing their or channeling their merit to save the Jewish people. That's one opinion. Rav, as you may recall, Rav and Shmuel frequently bring different perspectives to the Torah conversations, not only in halacha, in Jewish law, but also in matters of thought, Jewish thought, and Agada. Shmuel Omer, Mimei Chazael. In the days of Chazael, who is Chazael? Chazael was not a Jewish king; he was the king of Aram, and the verse says, "V'Chazael Melech Aram lachatz et Yisrael kol yimei Yehoachaz." That this king Chazael oppressed the Jewish people the entire era of the reign of Yehoachaz. Uksiv, and there's another verse. V'yachan Hashem v'yirachmei v'yifin aleim l'man brisa shel Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov v'lo ava shchita v'lo hishlichem al panav adata. Let's read this verse in the English. The translation is not complicated, but I want to get the nuance the way Rabbi Steinsaltz does it. The Lord was gracious to them, had compassion to them, turned towards them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and would not destroy them, neither has he till now cast them away. This is the last time, as Rabbi Steinsaltz points out, and Rashi point out, this is the last time in the Tanakh that we see a reference to the Jewish people being saved by virtue of the merit of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So again, Hashem tells the prophet, I'll have compassion, I'll save them, Leman Brito et Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, because of the covenant with Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. If you want to see it in Rashi, we no longer see Hashem referencing salvation because of the merit of the Avot. So this is where things took a turn for the worst in the era of Chazael Melech Aram. Interestingly enough, and I again, this is an idea I'm going to tease. I don't know if you follow the blogs about archaeology. I'm not sure if it's a good idea or a bad idea, but it's very interesting studying the dynamics between the kingdom of Aram and the Jewish people. It's one of the kingdoms that there's a lot of archaeological evidence. There's a stela from, with the declaration of victory from this king. And according to some opinions, it's actually the first place presently in archaeology where we find the name David referenced. He calls it Beis David. So there's a lot of very interesting stuff in this regards. But anyways, bottom line, it was a time that the Jewish people were for a while oppressed. Maybe even a king was killed by this kingdom. And for more information, you got to see the book of Kings, and then a lot of commentary, because it's a very complicated timelines to follow between the kingdom of David and Yisrael. But anyways, in our Gemara, the purpose is to tell us that this is the last time we see the merit of the Avot. So this is the Shmuel's opinion. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi has another opinion. He says, you know when the merit of the Avot run out? May Eliyahu, in the days of Eliyahu our Navi, Shenemar, and this is in the famous story, the showdown. We discussed this in the tractate of Brachos, the famous showdown between Elijah and the prophets of the Baal. And it says like this: Vayi ba'alois hamincha, was about the afternoon time, or the time of the mincha offering. Vayigash Eliyahu hanavi, and Elijah approached and says, Vayim Hashem l'kei Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Hayom yivada, today it will be known ki ata lekim b'Yisrael, because you are the God of Israel, va'ani avdecha, and I am your servant. With varcha sisi so the elah, and everything that I've done is an expression of your instructions. Rashi. He reads into the verse, the Gemara, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Hayom Yivada, today it'll be known. As if today, to say, today we'll channel Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but in the future, this currency, this influence might not be available. And so that is the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. I believe, actually, I don't know. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, go ahead.
Is that why the Mashiach hasn't come yet?
No, let me finish this.
Because he's waiting for the merit of us, of the Jewish people now.
You're asking a good question. Do me a favor. Let me just finish. We're going to see it, and then I want to discuss it, because you're asking a good question that we need to understand. Rabbi Yochanan says, the merit of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob ran out in the days of Chizkiyahu, Hezekiah. Shenemar, the verse says, Lemarbe hamisra u'leshalom ein kates al kisei David va'amam lachto lachinoto u'lesada b'mishpat v'tzedakah me'ata v'yad olam kinat Hashem tzvaot tasezot. Let's read it. For the increase of the realm and for peace without end, upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it, to establish it with justice, and with justice from now and forever, the zeal of the Lord of hosts performs this. So this is a description. Again, the Gemara says that it's a description of the era of King Chizkiyahu, who was quite a righteous king. This is Isaiah. And it talks about the protection of the Jewish people, but it says it is from now on all times, Kinat Hashem tzvot tasezot. You know what's going to cause this protection? Hashem's zeal, Hashem's kina, Hashem's jealousy, and the protection of the Jewish people. Rashi says, "Dichsiv me'ata v'yad olam." Kinat Hashem Tzavaot. You know what's going to cause the protection of Hashem? Hashem's zeal, Hashem's jealousy on behalf of the Jewish people, not Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So it sounds like in the days of Chizkiyahu, no longer was the protective merit our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Rather, the main protective element was Hashem's own desire, so to speak, for the Jewish people. And so here we have an interesting comment. The Gemara says that Tav stands for, there's no more Zechut Avot. We no longer have the merit of our fathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And the Gemara now gives a series of times in the biblical era when that merit may have run out. Based on a careful reading of different texts, we have a survey of these different things. The question here is very simple. When we say that the merit of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov run out, does that mean that the Jewish people are no longer worthy, valuable, and desirable to Hashem? So obviously not, because the Gemara is talking about points where this merit ran out, whatever that means, that are long before the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, the second Beis HaMikdash, and long before the cessation of Hashem's prophecy and expressed love for the Jewish people on that level. All we're saying is that there are different things, different merits that are very effective and forceful in the protection of the Jewish people. And one of them is the devotion of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. I already read for you the Ben Yehoyada's interpretation. Once upon a time, there was no need to hark towards, there was no need to reference and say, Hashem, listen, I know I'm in trouble, but there's Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It happened automatically. From then on, it maybe needed to be referenced, needed to be appealed to. You had to say, Hashem, please consider Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It certainly does not mean what the Christians like to say, God forbid, and I'm only bringing this up because I think we're all exposed to one extent or another to this idea, where they say that Hashem abandoned the covenant to the Jewish people. Of course not. All it means is that there's the Jewish people pushed their luck, and so there was a certain merit that ran out, and that merit we're describing here is the Zchut Avot Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So Rabbi Allen, you asked, is that what Mashiach's all about? I'm not sure if I really understand the question, although I think the sentiment you're asking is, what does it mean? Are we totally abandoned? Do we not have schus? And I think the answer is no. First of all, the Jewish people have continued to be able to channel that merit, but it needs to be with a conscious effort. And today, we're called upon to heed Hashem's call, to observe Torah mitzvot to the best of our ability. And in a world where it's not always easy, in a world with many distractions, every moment we spend plugging in Torah mitzvot, that is the zechut, and that's ultimately what we're asked. What's asked of us, and with Hashem's help, that will be ultimately the things that bring the merit of Mashiach's arrival. So it's a good question, and it's important to make that note, and that's what we're discussing here.
Rabbi.
Yes, Rabbi Errol.
Maybe what's going on here is to tell the people not to rely only on the schos and do nothing yourself. Maybe this is a call to the people to do something.
I like it. Rabbi Errol, I like it. I like what you're saying. You're saying once upon a time we could be so nonchalant about and secure in our relationship with Hashem that you don't have to do anything to foster that relationship. And now the message is, you want to have a relationship with Hashem, well, you're going to have to put in some investment. You're going to have to put in your own effort. It's not going to be enough to depend on our fathers. And you know what? I think this is a common struggle that we have, an intergenerational struggle that exists on a literal sense. Where many times, and we've discussed this before, of parents, especially if we're talking about an immigrant generation or first generation born, where there was a very, very strong drive to succeed and excel, and the kids many times wanted to surf on their, or go on their parents,
boat strings.
Yeah, and hold on and rise through society. But ultimately, enduring success and enduring achievement means that every generation needs to be not just dependent on the previous generation's affluence, connections, or success, but we need to be independently engaged and putting in effort, and that's on a literal sense, and certainly in a spiritual sense as well. And so, Rabbi Errol, I'm very grateful for your comments, and I think I think that's what we're saying, but I think it adds a lot of clarity here. So thank you. Anyone else before we take a peek at a few more lines of Gemara? So let me just bounce back one moment.
Bernie will give us a lecture on tough love.
Listen, we need all, yeah? It's not.
Well, forget about tough love. I just want to sort of piggyback on what Beryl was saying. I'd go beyond that. It's as though in the past, if we think of Zechut Avot, not Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, but the Zayda and the great-grandfather and everything. In the old days, if you had a Yichus brief that you come from the Chafetz Chaim, you come from the that was enough. We didn't have to know anything more about you. You're wonderful, intelligent, and this and that, the other thing. I think today we don't want people to say, you know who I'm related to. We want them to stand on their own, because the fact that your grandfather was strictly kosher, or that your grandmother lit candles, you remember, doesn't have any real meaning for other people who want to evaluate your merits. But you think it does.
Doesn't absolve you.
But you think it does. We used to do, my family, I come from a very, very, very religious family. So I'm saying it's even more so, you could get away from Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov and use a more contemporary example of just a few generations where some of the younger people, I'm talking about people like you and me, Beryl, don't worry, are dealing with these kinds of issues.
First of all, I got to say, this is like amazing. Every rabbi would be jealous to have this group basically writing my sermons for me.
Don't be so sure. Don't be so sure.
But I think that's a very important point. You know the famous anecdote where the guy walked into the restaurant and they asked him if it's kosher, and the person says, "What do you mean? Look, there's a picture of my grandfather on the wall." They said, "If your grandfather was behind the counter and you were hanging on the wall, I'd be a lot more comfortable."
Right.
So you got to have. We can't just hark back on past achievements. We need to put in the investment. But on the flip side, I think what Dr. said is that today we value achievement a lot more than just the family stories. So you don't have to have yichus, but if you put in the effort, and look who the big rabbis are today across the globe. Many of them, their parents or grandparents may have not been rabbis, but they put in the time, they put in the effort, and it brings to mind Joshua, of course, who wasn't the son of Moshe, but he put in the maximum investment, and he ends up being the person of value. Yasher Koyach. We will have to rework this into a sermon. Okay. Amar Rav Ami. Rav Ami adds over here. Ein misa b'loy chet, ve'ein yisurim b'loy oven. Do me a favor. There's a lot of philosophical questions that come from this, and let's go through the Gemara today and tomorrow, and then we can continue some more with this. Ein misa b'loy chet. There's no person. Because why am I saying that? Because there are different opinions that express different sides of this coin, different sides of this equation, what exactly the relationship to sin and death are. But for here, ein misa b'loy chet. No one dies without sin. Now that sounds like a very pessimistic statement. There's no person that's going to live. But the point is, Rav Ami's point is that everybody ultimately dies because they have sinned. And had they not sinned, they wouldn't have died. That's his comment. The Gemara is going to take this apart. Ve'en yisurim v'loy avin. And there's no human suffering that's not preceded by avera. So death is triggered by a sin, says Rami, and suffering too is triggered by sin.
That sounds very troubling.
I know. And of course, it brings to mind the question of tzaddik viralo. We always ask, why do righteous people suffer and evil people have it good? And so this is a very troubling question, which is why I don't want to take the statement and analyze it in isolation. I'm sorry?
It also brings up the question about Holocaust.
Certainly. So before we discuss it, the Gemara is going to also have a problem with this comment. So let's first see the Gemara's issues, and then we'll have the full picture, and we'll try to see if we can be at all comfortable with it or not. I'm not taking any sides, but the Gemara itself is going to challenge this assertion. Not exactly the way we would challenge it, but also with the challenges. How do we know that no one dies without sin? Because we're going to quote here from Yecheskel, and there's a very interesting medrash on this, but not for now. Hanefesh hachotas, the soul that sins, he tamos, that's the one who dies. Bein lo yisab av av, a child shouldn't bear the punishment, the consequences of his father's sin. V'av lo yisab avon haben, and a father shouldn't really bear the consequences of his son's sin. Tzidkas atzadik olav tihiyah v'rishas harasha. V'rishas harasha olav tihiyah. The righteousness of a tzaddik will be his to enjoy. The wicked, and the wickedness of the rasha will be his consequence. So from here we see that who dies? A sinner. Again, we're still in the middle of a process, a thought process. So a lot of questions, but let's see it through. Ein yisurim b'lei avon. How do I know? Says Rav Ami. How do I know that there's no suffering without sin? D'chsev ufakadati b'shevet pisham uvingoyim avonim. This is from Tehillim. Ufakadati b'shevet, and I will visit or give consequences for sin, uvingoyim avonim, and pain for the sin. So basically, there's a direct correlation in Tehillim. With the proper translation, I will punish their transgressions with a rod and their iniquities with strokes. Basically, we see there, in these verses seem to indicate, says Rav Ami, a correlation between death and sin, punishment and sin. Again, all the issues, we're all bothered by this. The Gemara is bothered by this. So let's continue. Meisvei, the Gemara is going to challenge this assertion based on a brayso that says as follows. Amru malachi ashares, and when I said that we're going to have a lot of juicy stuff, this is where we're starting that process. Amru malachi ashares lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The ministering angels say to Hashem, Rabbanu shel olam, Master of the world, mipnei ma konasta misal Adam harishon. Why did Adam have to die? And if we read between the lines, and by the way, in general, when you ask the question, the best thing to do is to read between the lines and understand what the questioner is really asking. Because sometimes the words of the question are an intellectual question, but the driver behind it is an emotional question. Or sometimes the person is asking you a question and really they want to discuss and open a different topic. But they ask, why does Adam have to die? Why do humans have to die? Amar lahem, Hashem responds, mitzvah kalat tzivisiv. V'avar alav. He was given a small mitzvah, and when he transgressed it, he invited death. Amar Loi, the angels say that would make sense with Adam. But we have other people that never sinned and they also die. So really their question is, why is there death for righteous people? Our question, why should a good person die? And by the way, all of these instances are challenged on a number of levels too. So there's a lot of there's tiers of questions here that are going to be introduced and have to be resolved. Amar Loi, Moshe and Aaron also were good folks. They did the Torah pretty nicely, and they died. Amar Lahem. So Hashem responds, Mikra echad tzaddik l'rasha l'tayvah. The verse that states, there's one event to the righteous and to the wicked, to the good. Let's read the whole verse here. All things come alike to all. There's one event to the righteous and to the wicked, meaning the same thing happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good, to the clean, to the unclean, to him who sacrificed, and to him who does not sacrifice. As is the good, so is the sinner, and he who swears as he who fears an oath. Apparently, this is Rabbi Steinsaltz's commentary. Death is not dependent upon one's actions. Everyone dies. Let's read the verse again. Mikra echad l'tzadik l'rasha. What do they say? The only thing that is certain is death and taxes. Is that what they say?
And Jackie Mason adds anti-Semitism.
And anti-Semitism. Eventually, everyone dies. I hope I'm not saying something that's I mean, it's a disappointing part of life, but I hope I'm not saying something that's terribly shocking. So basically, the verse is Hashem saying it's not connected to sin. Part of the human experience Just like every human being to ever exist has to be born, eventually every human being to live is going to die. And it's no connection between their righteousness and their spiritual or their relationship with God. So this brisa is a big theological discussion about the cause and reason for death in this world. There's initially a claim that says that it's connected to sin, but ultimately the brisa says that Hashem concedes that death is just part of the human condition. Challenging Rav Ami, who says that people only die because of sin. We're smack in the middle of the discussion. I think any analysis that doesn't first review the entire Gemara and then would just not be comprehensive. So I think we're going to have to leave today in the middle of a question. I hope you'll join us tomorrow. But suffice it to say, the Gemara has a question. We have a question. Why is it that there are people, very innocent people, children particularly? That's the big question. Why do children and totally innocent individuals have to suffer? Why suffering? Why death? Is it connected to punishment or not? It shouldn't be. If we get to call the shots. So we're smack in the middle of a very deep theological discussion about the correlation between death and sin, suffering and sin. And then we're going to get to another discussion, which is there are a lot of people that apparently sinned in the Torah. Are the sins as bad as they seem? Are they better? Are they worse? And so we're just starting a very, very important and interesting journey through this segment from the Talmud. I'm sorry to leave on a cliffhanger. I know it's frustrating, but I hope you'll join us tomorrow. And
we have to go into overtimes.
if we didn't have a Chumash class and I have a few meetings now, I would go into overtime. This is exciting. So folks, I want to thank.
It's comforting to know that this is not a new problem for us, that we shouldn't think, we discovered America. It's a problem we've been tackling for a little while now.
We've been grappling with these problems since human beings exist, I suspect. All right, folks, thank you all. Have a wonderful day. Looking forward to seeing everybody tomorrow. And I want to, as always, but particularly today, we had a lot of discussion and very valuable insight. I want to thank you all for sharing. And please come ready to share some more tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.